right, so as people are filing in, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Becca, and I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books. And for those of you who don't know, Belmont Books is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. So you can pretty much find us right outside of Cambridge, Mass. And before we begin, I'd just like to let everybody know of a number of other virtual events coming up in November. So the first is K.M. Jackson, who's the author of How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days. We'll be in conversation with Mary Pauline Rowley on November 10th. We also have Allison Jean Lester, author of Glide, in conversation with Andrew Gurnett on November 17th. So you can register for these events as well as some other events happening later in the month on our website, which is belmontbooks.com. That's also where you can purchase tonight's book, The Dangers of an Ordinary Night. And if you have any concerns during the event, please feel free to message me in the chat. But we ask if you have questions for the authors, please type them into the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom screen. And we'll hope to get to as many of your questions as we can. So we're so excited to welcome Lynne Reeves and Hank Phillippi Ryan. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about them, and then I'll turn the event over to them. So first and foremost, we have Lynne Reeves, who's the author of the new novel, The Dangers of an Ordinary Night. Lynne is an internationally recognized family counselor and novelist. Her short fiction essays and articles have appeared in Parents, Psychology Today, Solstice Literary Magazine, Chautauqua Journal, Craft Literary, Fiction Writers Review, Brainchild, and more. Lynne regularly appears as a media guest expert to discuss contemporary family life and preventative mental health. This is her first novel of domestic suspense. However, she's also the author of the acclaimed novels Girl Sent Away, Sea Escape, and Life Without Summer. She has also written the nonfiction guides, Let's Talk About It, Adolescent Mental Health, and Negotiation Generation, Take Back Your Parental Authority Without Punishment. She currently teaches writing at Grove Street Writers and is a developmental editor for writers of fiction and nonfiction. We also have Hank Phillippi Ryan here with us tonight. Hank Phillippi Ryan is the USA Today bestselling author of 13 suspense novels. She has also won multiple prestigious awards for her crime fiction, including 5 Agathas, 4 Anthonys, and the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. She's also the on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHD-HTV and has won 37 Emmys, 14 Edward R. Murrow Awards, and dozens of other honors for her groundbreaking journalism. National book reviews have called Hank a master at crafting suspenseful mysteries and a superb and gifted storyteller. Hank's novels have been named Best Thrillers of the Year by Library Journal, New York Post, BookBub, Pop Sugar, Real Simple Magazine, and others. Her 2020 thriller is The First to Lie. It garnered a starred review from Publishers Weekly and is a nominee for the Anthony Award for Best Novel and the iconic Mary Higgins Clark Award. Her newest book is Her Perfect Life, a chilling psychological standalone about fame, family, and revenge. It received starred reviews from Kirkish and Publishers Weekly, which called it a superlative thriller. So we're so excited to have you both here with us this evening, and be on the lookout because I'll send out a link for you guys to purchase tonight's book. So look for that in the chat. And without further ado, I'll turn the event over to you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Becca. Let me tell you very quickly, the bizarre noise that you're hearing in the background is my husband riding the treadmill in the room above us. And he has promised to be off the treadmill at 7 o'clock on the dot tonight. So maybe he just didn't change his watch on daylight savings time. I'm not quite sure what happened, but I promise that sound will go away in a moment as soon as he realizes that he has been riding the treadmill too long. He's reading a book on the treadmill, so perhaps he's reading The Dangers of an Ordinary Night, and he is so immersed in this story that he cannot put it down. We will just say that is true. Lynne, this is a marvelous book. This is brilliant and insightful and emotional and surprising, and it's your launch day. Happy launch day.
It's launch day, so thank you so much to Becca and to you, Hank, and to everyone at Belmont Books, to those of you who've come to listen tonight and to jump in with questions and thoughts about domestic suspense or families or any topic that we touch on. I am very, very honored to be here on Publication Day.
Well, you're not a novice author, clearly, not a novice writer, clearly, but this is your first novel of this kind. Why did you decide to essentially change genres to delve into psychological domestic suspense?
Sure. Well, I have to say, I feel like this novel began as many of my novels do, which is that something's on my mind.
Hmm.
There's an issue in family life that is coming up for me a lot in my work, or it's coming a lot up a lot for me in the conversations that I have with people. And I start from that issue. So the novels that I've written before, which are categorized as book club fiction or women's fiction, all center around a family life issue, whether that be grief or the mother daughter relationship or adolescent mental health. And this book started in a similar fashion. I was really hearing a lot of stories and a lot of puzzling comments about addiction. And we know that our country is in a dire strait with the opioid crisis. And lots of people were talking to me about their stories, but always in a hush hush tone, always in a way that was as if it was a profound secret. And that if we talk about a physical illness, you know, if we have diabetes or heart disease or something, we don't have trouble talking about that. But this particular issue, people have a lot of trouble talking about. And so the novel started there. But as with the addiction that happens within families, uh, there are lies, there is deception, there is a sort of mask that we wear. And before long, that was coming into the story. And I realized this is domestic suspense. This is the emotional life of a family turned up, the dial turned way up. So before long, it became very clear to me that the novel was telling me what it was. And here we are.
And what did you think about that as your sort of writer brain morphed one story into another kind of story? Do you read psychological suspense, or did the story just become that and then that's what the label turned out to be?
Sure. I read widely. There's not a kind of novel that I would shy away from. I think there's something for readers and writers to learn about every genre. So I read everything. And so it didn't surprise me that it would go down this road, and I was comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And I also felt like there was a little bit more leeway for me to go into the deeper, darker emotions that we don't talk about a lot, that we have more trouble bringing into the light. Things like grief or despair or betrayal. Uh, Things like the blind spots that we have in the relationships with the people that we love the most, the things we see and don't see or choose not to see. And it just became really fertile territory to explore. So I went,
Sure. Go ahead.
I just decided I would go with it, and I would let these characters be as flawed as they appeared to me. And again, I don't really shy away from characters that are flawed. I feel like we all have our best selves, but we all do things and say things that we would not characterize as our best selves. So these very three-dimensional characters who are definitely making decisions that readers will grapple with, that's okay by me.
I mean, it's interesting to hear how the book morphed from one thing to another because your really rave Kirkus review called your book uncommonly assured. Little did they know that it wasn't what it started out, what it started out to be. And someone else said it's perfect for fans of Celeste Ng and Megan Abbott. What is it about those novelists that you think had your reviewers and readers making that kind of comparison?
Well, I'm first of all, I'm honored by the comparisons. I feel that they're very generous, and I loved the Kirkus review because to think that someone would consider my novel assured is quite a compliment. I think what brings my work to share those sensibilities is the idea that those writers too have plot. So there's a something that propels you from the beginning to the end of the story. And there are twists and turns along the way. But I think at the core of those writers' work, and I hope at the core of mine, is the psychology of the characters, which is what are they struggling with? Why are they struggling with it? When we talk about writing craft, we talk about the plot is the pressure on the system. It's what pressure goes on to the characters to see what they're made of. And so I think both things are equally important.
So interesting. I love that about the pressure. I'm imagining writing, thinking, what is the pressure? What is the pressure? What do they want? How far will they go to get it? And who's in the way? And what decision will they make, which reveals the character, to make that decision and what will happen to them after that. But to ground all of our viewers in your book, and let me say to you all, please leave questions in the Q&A. You know how to hover your mouse over the screen at the bottom and it says Q&A. You just type your question right in there and I will look at them and we will make sure we get to all of them, as many as we can. Or if you don't want to do that, just put your questions in the chat and we will monitor them as we go. So Lynne, just to ground everyone in this book, Joe, just tell us a little bit about the basic plot of the book.
Sure. So it starts off with two teenage girls who attend a performing arts high school in Boston. They go to a school that is fictional, but it's located in the very real former Exeter Street Theater. That's where I've placed the story. So it's set in Boston. And these two girls go missing, but 2 days later, they're found. And one girl survives the ordeal and one does not. And three characters step in to try to figure out what happened. One is the mother of the girl who's returned, and she really wants to find out what happened to her daughter, who can't really remember what happened. The second person is the reunification therapist, who is the therapist charged with helping the teenager reacclimate to her life. These are very specific kinds of counselors that have helped people like J.C. Dugard, Elizabeth Smart, people that we have heard of who have come back to their families and need help reacclimating to their surroundings. And then the third character is the detective that has to figure out what happened. And so these three characters share the point of view, all with the effort of trying to figure out what happened to the girls, why they became, why they were in the situation they were in, and who was involved. There are a cast of characters that could potentially have had something to do with the abduction. And it takes place in this performing arts school, where, as you can imagine, people wear masks and people don't share their true selves, and people are jockeying for their position in the school, and parents have something to say about their teenagers' fame and brush with celebrity. So there's a lot about that social celebrity culture involved in the story. And ultimately, readers will find out the very complicated story about what happened.
And it's presented so beautifully, though, and I want to talk about that in a minute. So, I wouldn't call it complicated. I'd call it layered and complex, but very easy to understand and follow and read. You see me writing; I'm taking notes about everything. And the thing that was so natural and normal about this, when something like this happens, when two girls walk out of a late night audition and disappear from the streets of Boston, which everyone who lives in Boston knows where that is and can envision that just so perfectly. Your settings are gorgeous, the Boston and the Cape Cod, perfection. Everybody hopes that it's someone who's not in their sphere, who's not in their circle, some weird stranger. And then as you begin to peel back the layers of the story, as is often the case, it is someone who is in their orbit.
Yes. And it's a lot of people who are revealed to have in some way inserted themselves into the drama. So I think one of the other things that happens here is that there is a desire on the part of some people to be part of the story, to be part of what is happening, what is capturing the media's attention. And Hank, no one knows that better than you, that there are people who they're driven by being attached to the story. And that becomes really interesting.
Well, you have a wonderful scene in the book where some parents are pleading to have their daughter returned, and you have one of the characters is sort of a publicity PR person who's saying to the camera people, the photographers and the networks, that's one of the fathers, that's the father. And that sort of ugly undercurrent of getting a good story, and the people who stand in the front row and the teenagers who come, and sort of some are pretending to be sad and some really are sad. That scene was handled so chillingly gorgeously, because that's exactly what it's like. But going back to your characters, I mean, there are so many characters that we know in this book. The ambitious teenager, the arrogant teacher, the stage mother, the detective with the secret. And another of your rave reviews from a reader, and families with so many layers of emotion. You know, we all have our families, and we all know what we know, and we all know what people don't know about that. And this reviewer said, not all of them are likable, but I know people like them. And I know people who are like them. And that is another one of the geniusnesses of, is that a word, of your book, is you're creating real characters who we know, some of whom make decisions that we don't agree with, but that's life.
Right. And I think that really comes from my counseling background, because my perception on human nature is that we all have those times when we are not likable. But that is because we're struggling with something. And when we're struggling with something, some of the choices we make for ourselves are challenging, and some of the relationship choices that we make. One of the big issues in the novel is the betrayal in a relationship around addiction. That one couple in particular, the father struggles with addiction, and the woman, the wife, plays the role of the caretaker. And she grapples with, when is it my turn to have the focus be on me? When is this too much? Is it ever going to be okay for me to say I don't want to do this anymore? And this is true of a lot of people. A lot of people struggle with that question.
And the word you said, roles, it plays such a role in this novel. The assigned roles we have, the roles we want, the parts that we're given to play, that we're either in a play that we have to perform, or in our lives that we have to perform. So much of this book is about performance. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, well, I have to say, it's such an interesting thing. And as a writer, you know this. You have very specific things you want to explore in fiction, and you never know which of them are going to collide into a particular novel. So I always knew that I would write about the theater. I always knew that I would. And I always knew that I would write something about addiction. I never knew that the two things would collide in the way that they
Ah,
did. And so that became, like you said, the masks people wear. That started to make me realize, oh, in a way, people who struggle with addiction and the people that don't want anyone to know that addiction is in their family are playing roles. They are performing to the outside world that everything is fine, when in fact inside their family it's not fine. And that's when I knew the two pieces, the performing arts part and the addiction story, could come together.
well, let's talk about those a little bit separately, and then again together. The addiction element of your book is a very delicate, touchy, careful. I mean, you handled it with such grace and such respect and such honesty about it. Talk a little bit about how you decided to enter that world, and how much research you did, and how careful you were about dealing with that.
Well, again, to be honest, I started off thinking I was going to write an addiction book that was nonfiction. So I thought that what I was going to be doing was talking about, in my practice, what I call the triple threat of vulnerability, which is our hardwiring, the way we are made, the way we live in the world, our environment that we live in, and what we're exposed to. So I thought I would look at those three areas of vulnerability, and I started doing research. I met with a number of the women who participated in the documentary, the HBO documentary Heroin Cape Cod, USA.
Mhm.
And I met those women and I spoke to them one on one and in groups. And they each had such unique stories. And yet there was so much universal that they each spoke about, themes that I could see. And I began to think that to write something that was prescriptive, here's why people get addicted and here's what to do about it, felt like many people could do that, but not everyone could fictionalize a story that would allow readers to talk about these issues, maybe not like some of the decisions that the characters make. But if people are talking about that, if they're agreeing or disagreeing what Nell does or what Kira does or what Sin does, I'm actually okay with that, because it's getting us talking about these choices. So it wasn't long before I realized that I did need to write a novel about it. and that I needed to provide an opportunity for people to talk about their issue, but get some distance from their own family.
Robin is saying fiction is a backdoor to our brains. So wise. What were the themes that the women were talking about? Do you remember what they were specifically?
Yeah, so the theme of feeling lied to, when
Mm.
in fact what the person who's struggling with addiction is doing is protecting that cycle of addiction, that sense of I get a reward, I have a craving, I get a reward, that cycle that we know our brains go through with everything from our phones to our evening chocolate to things that are much more serious and interfering with the quality of our lives. But it is a cycle of addiction that happens, or a cycle of reward and craving. And the women talked a lot about how very difficult it was to be lied to, and that their trust was betrayed more than dozens of times. That people would, their spouse or their child would take money from them, or promise them they weren't using, or make all kinds of promises to go to treatment and then not do so, and how heartbreaking that was to love someone through that. And that was really what I tried to capture in the story.
Oh, very much so. I mean, they're very good at lying. It's not, I mean, there's something that happens, I think, in an addict's brain that makes them be really superly good at covering over all those little bits of guilt that people who aren't addicted to something have. It's hard to tell a lie very well.
Yeah, and I think it comes partly because of what's happening in the brain, which is you're trying to protect the addiction because you want that craving reward cycle, right? But it also has to do with people trying to protect their self-esteem. I am not all bad, I am not a terrible person. And the character of Zeke, who struggles with a gambling addiction, I don't know. I feel warmth toward him. I actually see him as someone who really does want to think of himself as a good person, even though he makes some dreadful choices that impact his family.
And the character of Zeke, what a it is heartbreaking to see him in the scene I was describing on Boston Common, where they're asking for their daughters to come back, and he clambers onto the stage and really says everything wrong,
Yeah.
and doesn't realize that that's what he's doing, and he thinks he's doing the right thing. I do think that another one of the reviews that I saw of your book is really apropos of this, because on the talking about the impact of addiction, she says Lynne Reeves has done a real service with this novel. And that's what she was talking about, that you have brought this to the fore and made it, I don't want to use the word palatable, but readable to talk about. And then people will look at the world in a different way after this.
Well, it's definitely my hope that it gives people the space to talk about the issue when it's not about their family. That's another wonderful thing about fiction is you can talk about these issues because we're not revealing anything about ourselves. We've got enough space to feel safe enough to say, oh my goodness, look what Nell did, or can you believe that Zeke did this? You can do that because it's not you, and it's not your family, and it's not the people you love. So you're exploring the issue at a safe distance. And I think for some of the more difficult social issues, that's the only place to start exploring them, is that safer place.
And talk about a little bit about family dynamic too, then, how couples who are together and who have families and have responsibilities and have roles, how they fall apart under the pressure of disaster, or of grief, or of fear, or of guilt, or of betrayal.
Right. Well, the counselor in this story, the reunification therapist, says to them in her first meeting with them, the issues you struggled with before will be amplified. So it is not that you have necessarily new issues, though of course you have the new issue to contend with, that your daughter has experienced trauma. But who you were before is who you are, right? So we hear that expression, wherever you go, there you are. It's that same idea that if you had issues as a couple, if you had issues working through your communication, well, then the dial is turned up on that when you're under the enormity of the stress that this family is under, with the spotlight and with their daughter wanting to go back to school, and with everyone having opinions about what she should be doing, people weighing in on their parenting, people weighing in on their marriage.
Yeah.
They too went into the spotlight. And as Nell says, she was a backstage mom. She didn't want the spotlight, and suddenly she's in it.
Well, that's exactly what I was gonna bring up, the idea that the spotlight goes on these people. I was reading a book where someone said when there's a murder, the person who is killed isn't the only victim.
That's right.
Obviously, and the disaster, the harm to everyone who's around them is so beautifully explored in this. Even the people who, even the survivor family,
Right,
talk about
absolutely.
that kind of.
In my research, I read a lot about what women experienced when their children had been abducted, whether the children were returned or not. And one woman just, I mean, I was floored by it. And I did use the line. She said, suddenly we were members of an ugly little club.
I
And I
remember.
thought it's a chilling line because this isn't something they wanted. It's a small group of people who experience this, and then they are thrust into the spotlight. And
And
that's what happens to this mother.
and just as in your parallel for the with performance throughout, in that ugly little club of someone who has had their a family member stolen, ripped away, killed, there are rules and stage directions for what they're supposed to do, and you're very clear about that, so tender about it, and so touching in the book, how you're
And
supposed to be.
exactly the way in which people want you to act. So at one point, she says, I have to smile, and I have to not smile too much, and I have to be stoic, and I can't be mad, right? Because people don't like an angry person. So there are all these rules set out for her, and yet there she is, not doing anything except desperate to get her child back. And again, once her child has been returned to her, the rules continue. She's supposed to go back to work. She's supposed to act as if nothing happened. She's
And be
supposed to.
happy and be happy in this after this horrible event. I mean, I think it really is so enlightening about how to watch these things unfold in real life television. You really help us get behind the brains of the people who are on the stage in this horrible situation. Let's move across the hall to the performance, the theater aspect of this book. This is quite astonishing, and I call you the queen of structure, because the structure of this book is so extraordinary. It's not ordinary, it's extraordinary, unusual, and unique. Talk a little bit about how the theater specifically plays into this, and then we'll go into the performances in the book.
Sure, sure. Well, anyone who knows me, and Hank, you've known me for a while, you know that I'm actually a really sunny, happy person. So I'm writing these stories about the more difficult side of family life, and some of those things are painful and hard to talk about. But at the same time, I'm really an optimistic, happy, sunny person. And so I wanted to infuse the novel with just enough levity so people could explore the issue, but they could also be involved in the narrative in a way that felt compelling and more engaging in a way that didn't feel dark, because I'm not a dark person. I frankly think that the more we talk about these tough subjects, the lighter and happier we'll be. That's my belief.
You do. Let me just ask you about that. Why?
Sure,
Why is I don't want to get away from the structure because I love it.
I will.
But why do you think that is that release or relief?
Because it's burdensome to hold all of that negative energy, that emotional pain inside our bodies. And we're relational creatures. We thrive in connection to other people. And so when we are open about our struggles, other people can be open in return. When we can say, why isn't addiction handled like any other health issue or any other mental health issue? Why do we look at mental health differently than physical health? If we could talk about that, people would be freer to ask for help. People would be freer to say, I'm struggling. People would not have to play those roles. They would not have to wear those masks. So I do believe that talking about it allows us to be freer, lighter, and in my opinion, healthier.
I mean, it is, in reading the book, that there are dark parts of the book, but it's really engaging and a page turner to read. It isn't a book that pulls you down. It's a book that opens you up, I think, is
That's
the way
nice.
that
That's
I would
really
look at
nice. I really appreciate that feedback because that is my intent.
Good.
Which is why, getting back to the structure,
Yes.
which is why I chose a super fun structure for this. So back when I was in high school, I wanted to go to college for theater. And back in the day, I won't say how old I am, but back in the day, you were given three options. You may go to be a nurse, you may be a secretary, you may be a teacher. And so I was someone who followed the rules and I went to nursing school. And I then went on to get my master's in education and counseling. And I found myself in a counseling field, doing a lot of speaking, doing a lot of writing. I ended up working at an opposite affiliate to yours for 10 years on the morning show, doing parenting segments and talking about issues affecting families. But the creative part of me was missing. I still missed my
Ah,
theater life and I still missed my acting in plays. And I decided that this would be a place where I could explore that again. So what I did was I read countless plays. I actually have a whole shelf of them behind me. I have a few of them right here just to show people some of the plays that I looked at. One of my favorites, A Sea of White Horses, another, a beautiful play about addiction called People,
ah.
Places, and Things. And I explored all of these plays and I decided that it would be fun to use the plays as a structural element for the story. So each chapter is based on a play with hidden pictures from that play, little images, little phrases, little thoughts about that play inside the narrative. And before I knew it, dozens and dozens of plays were finding their way into the narrative.
Well, it's so much fun to read, and I'm looking down because I'm flipping through your book, which begins with Act One, which is from Revolutionary Road, the book. But so this is a play, The Swing of the Sea.
Yes, The Swing of the Sea is a play that takes place on a coastline. And it's a quite ominous play. And of course, the opening of the novel is quite ominous because it is the crime.
Well, listen to this. It says, this is the first line. The harvest moon is a spotlight leading June Danforth deeper into the woods. And you think about that because, first of all, it's just so cinematic. And I'm going to get back to the plays. And secondly, the spotlight, that is what this book is about. And that is one of the first words in the book. I mean, that is just chillingly gorgeous. Was that the first line always?
That was the first line always. Yes. And again, I knew there was theater and I knew there were addiction. I knew there were these characters, but sometimes I was surprised by how beautifully these ideas fit together. And that's where the beauty of the writing comes, where you're so immersive in your and you say to yourself, these things actually went together all along. And I'm just sort of shepherding them shepherding them forward.
That is the joy and magic of writing, no question about it. So which came first, the play or the chapter? Did you write the chapter to fit the play or find the play and say, ooh, that would be a good chapter? And you were talking about the Easter eggs in the
Yes.
pictures in the
So I
story.
will I will say that I did both. I did sometimes go searching for plays. At first, I did just a ton of reading. My process is that once I know what my issues are going to be and the kinds of characters that will appear on the page, I do all my research first. So I read tons of nonfiction, tons of memoir, in this case, tons of plays. And then I try to put everything aside so that what comes out is what I've internalized instead of here's a great fact. You know, I try really hard not to do that. But as far as the plays go, there are some that I just knew would be in there. Like I absolutely love the play, The Sea of White Horses. I love that play. And I love 6 Degrees of Separation. And, you know, I love Fame. I mean, who hasn't read Fame or seen that marvelous movie? And so I knew that some of them would make their way in there. But then sometimes I'd get to a chapter and I'd say, I sort of know what my purpose here is for the characters, but if I had a play that guided me, it would help. And so then I would go in search of
What
something
does
that.
guided you mean? What does guided you? What does that mean?
So I did take the themes of each of the plays to make sure that they fit the chapters. So there's no play that's just an arbitrary title that fits the chapter. There's something about the play that informs the chapter and something about the chapter that is the play. And so I didn't want any of them to be just sort of, oh, that sounds like a good title, I'll put that there. It had to be that they somehow supported one another. I feel like that's the architecture that I like. And whether readers see it or not, I'm okay if they don't see it because I know it's there.
Well, the readers are going to
They're
see it.
gonna,
I'm just sitting
they're
here in
gonna
awe. You know, if you just arrived, we're talking about The Dangers of an Ordinary Night by Lynne Reeves, this marvelous psychological suspense about addiction and performance and theater and families and fame and betrayal, which is just out now. And we're talking about the plays that are in this book. And I want you all, are you listening to this, you out there, that Lynne, it's hard enough to write a book, but Lynne has just made it orders of magnitude more gorgeous and more difficult for herself by balancing the idea that each chapter will be a play and that will be a meaningful play. You're not like slapping Hamlet on as a chapter and then making it be about
there's no Hamlet.
I know there's no Hamlet. But did you just consume random plays? How did you decide what to read?
I literally, it was one of those where I'd start looking for plays that I remembered that I loved, and I'd
Mhm.
start reading, and then oh, what about this one? Or I'd go on a playwright website. There's you can, if you go to, you know, bookshop.com or go to your independent bookstore, you can order plays. But there's also, like, Samuel French is a publishing company, and you
Uh-huh.
can buy plays
Oh.
there. So I would start scouring those for themes. I'd say, ooh, plays about addiction, or I'd say, plays about betrayal and marriage. And before you know it, all of these plays would come to me and I would read them. And when something clicked, I would know, oh, that does fit, you know?
I love that. You make this puzzle that you
Yes.
don't even know what the picture is, and you're putting little pieces, little pieces, little pieces to see what the picture turns out to be. And the thing about reading a play that I was just thinking about as you were talking is that it requires you to visualize it. You know, it's the script of a movie, let's say, because it's meant to be performed. It's meant to have people in it. Just like a book is meant to be about to make you envision real people. You should say, "Oh, I can just see that." So talk a little bit about also though, I was so tantalized by that you said there were little hidden pictures from the plays in the chapters. Were you guided? I mean, you did say that you were guided by the plays. Talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit.
Well, for example, every play has images that recur or themes that are realized in them. And so in some cases, it was as simple as the play A Steady Rain, that scene, it would be raining. And in that, there is one scene where the detective is in his family home, and there's a lot of darkness in that family. There was a lot of undiscussables in that family. And the detective has a secret of his own. So the fact that he would be in his childhood home and say, I don't remember ever being in this house where there wasn't a steady rain, is, again, it's my little Easter egg for the play, because the play is about that. It's about the fact that there is a pervasiveness of sadness in some families. It's just true. And again, my argument is that it's because people aren't bringing things into the light. And in Fitz's family, people do not talk about sort of the elephants in the living room, right? So it could be as simple as that, or it could be thematic. Like 6 Degrees of Separation was super fun because it was my way of allowing the character of the detective and the character of the psychiatrist to actually know people in common. And
Yeah.
so I got to play with 6 Degrees of Separation, that in another scenario, they would have already known one another, but suddenly they know each other now.
And also in 6 Degrees of Separation, it's all about someone who's pretending to be someone else.
Correct. Correct. And that's the secret between Fitz and his sister. So,
I mean, it's
so
just so much fun to read. This sort of your structure sort of revealed itself to me as I was reading it, and I sort of went back when I realized it, and I thought, wait, is she doing this? Is she actually doing this? And it was incredibly much fun to read. A couple more things about the theater. You said that you loved the theater forever. What were you in plays? Were you an actor, director? What were you involved in and where?
So I started very young. I danced and I sang. And then by the time I got to uh, about to go to high school, my two sisters, who are older than I, went to the Catholic school in the next town over. And I had heard from my dance teacher that the high school that was public had a huge theater arts department. And so I lobbied my father to let me go to the public school instead of the Catholic school
Oh, for that.
for that, because I wanted to take those courses. And so he did agree, my mother agreed, and I ended up going to the public school, and I was able right out of the gate to take performance, improvisation. My gym was dance. So,
Oh,
I mean, seriously, I got immersed in it and I really loved it. I was in, probably 6 or 7 plays before I even hit my junior year. It was just fantastic.
do you remember the parts you played?
Yeah, well, my first lead was Mabel Normand in the play Mac and Mabel,
Oh,
that was played by Bernadette Peters on Broadway. So
that's a difficult role. Isn't
she's a
that
little bit of an
fantastic
icon to me, Bernadette Peters, right?
to
Um,
everyone?
yeah, and I was in, Half a Sixpence and Spoon River Anthology and Bye Bye Birdie, and it was just great, great fun. I loved every minute of it, and I still miss it. So this novel actually allowed me to kind of experience that once again.
It's
And
interesting. I was in.
tomorrow on social media, I'll throw up a couple of photos of me back in the day. You'll
Oh, please, that would be absolutely wonderful. I have a secret longing to be an actor as well. It would be, I've always wanted to be in Bye Bye Birdie. I've always wanted to play, any role in any Tom Stoppard play. I am completely in that. And I was in plays in college too, but I was always like the Rosalind Russell best friend character. That's who I always was. And I loved it. I loved the teamwork and that you had to be perfect. And I loved the rehearsals and I loved the performance. What did you love about the theater?
I loved the idea that we could, as a group, create something together.
Yeah.
The one thing about being novelist is that you create in isolation unless you have a feedback group, and unless you have, I have trusted readers. I know you have trusted readers. But in theater, the sense of community is all powerful because it cannot be done without everyone. And I loved that so much. I loved that the stage manager was just as important as the makeup artist, just as important as the costume designer. And it was just this sense of family. I just loved it. Now it's consuming, right? You're rehearsing constantly, and when you're in a show, you're in a show. I mean, you eat, live, and breathe it. But that's pretty powerful too.
And you think about the parallel between the cast of a play and the cast in a family, that everybody has their roles in the family, but they don't know the lines.
That's right. And they don't necessarily know the drivers of the other family members, right? In a play, you're aware of the other characters' motivations. In a family, you may not necessarily know other people's motivations. They may not reveal those to you. And it's just, again, there's so much about playwriting too that's really important, because a playwright knows that someone does not step on the stage without motivation. They know what they're on the stage to do. But in a family, we don't always know that. We don't know people's next move.
I'm just thinking about method acting and how you subsume yourself into the role and you be that person and you see the world through that person's eyes and their motivations. Do you do that? Do you method act when you're writing? When you're writing something sad, do you get all small? And when you're writing something fun, do you sit up straight and smile?
I do make my characters talk out loud, because
Oh,
I really feel like I get the gist of that. So when I'm writing, sometimes what I'll do is I'll turn on the record feature on my phone, and I'll just start talking about what would Nell say, or how would Nell and Zeke have an argument. And there can be dialogue there that I actually end up using, because I know what I would say if I were mad at my own husband. I know what I would say if I was disappointed in my best friend, right? And so I sometimes do it that way, and it really does help it to feel authentic to what the person would say.
sure. I mean, there's a feature on Word that you can dictate is the word I'm searching for so unsuccessfully. And when I get to dialogues in my novels, sometimes I'll turn on that dictation feature and just say it.
Yeah.
And the dialogue comes, when the dictation feature gets it right, which is 90% of the time, it's very natural. And also your brain sort of guides you to what would be logical, reasonable, natural to say next, something that you might not have thought of. Let me quickly remind readers that if you're saying, well, I don't know, how am I supposed to know what play that is? I don't know plays. Lynne has put in the back all of the plays that are
Yeah,
referred to in the book and with the playwright, so you can look them up if you're tantalized
yeah.
by the story. I mean, that is such a brilliant idea. I cannot begin to tell you how brilliant an idea that was. Have you always wanted to be a writer?
No, I wanted to be an actress. I really thought that that would be the storytelling path that I would take.
So
Is
not there was no undercurrent of
no, no, I mean, I was a girl who always was a storyteller. I played with my dolls in very dramatic fashion. And I remember that right before I went off to high school, I was still playing with dolls and I was still doing the stories. And my mother used to tell me, she'd go, quick, the girls are coming. And when the friends were coming up the street, I'd shove them right up into my bed. I still was using my dolls to tell stories. I really was engaged in storytelling. And when I got to high school and could be in theater, it felt like such a natural fit.
sure,
I did not participate in storytelling I was more of a listener as a counselor to story and to what makes a narrative compelling. And it wasn't until, probably my late 30s that I started dabbling with,
wow.
I'm going to write a novel. I think I'm going to do it. And so there I was.
Was it you who said once that people talk in story?
Yes. Yes. Everyone I know talks in story. I don't know whether it's the idea that it's the way we hold people's real emotion and memory is through story. It's very grounding, right? But I mean, think about when someone's really a good storyteller, you just lean in, you just really want to hear what comes next. And many of my clients speak that way. First this happened and then this happened. And it's like a natural arc because the story as they're telling it is escalating, right? So I was always drawn to it, but I decided that when there was an opportunity for me to explore my creative self, I wanted to do something that I thought I could learn something. And I had never written a novel before, and I thought, okay, well, I don't know how to do it, but nobody needs to know that. I'm just gonna learn. And I learned, and I had an agent at the time who represented my nonfiction. And I told her, would you like to take a look at it? And she very politely said, well, of course, I'll take a look. But sometimes writers have a nonfiction agent and then they have a fiction agent. And I think she was trying to hedge her bets in case it was dreadful. But then she read it and she represented me and she sold my first one. So this is my fourth.
But rewinding a little bit, you couldn't, I'm making a statement here that may not be true, but you couldn't have written that book without your experiences in listening to the people who come to talk with you.
I think so. I think I've learned a lot about when people are telling a story, what is their goal? So, in other words, no one tells you a story unless they want an emotional response from you, right? And I think that that's true when we read. We don't want to hear, I had a cup of coffee and then I, sat on the recliner. Like, so what is what we would say to anyone who wrote that, right? Instead, we want people to experience, why is the person telling us the story in the first place? What's the response they would like to elicit from us, whether that's compassion
Mhm.
or interest or validation.
Yes.
And I think fiction is the same thing. My characters want things and readers want things from my characters. And I think that that's a fair exchange.
And in addition to that, when someone's telling a good story, you care about it. And we ask ourselves that as authors every day, why do I care? Why do I care? If I don't care, the reader won't care. Why does the character care? Why does this matter? And the idea of telling a story that matters is what you do so gorgeously in this. But if you didn't always want to be a writer, you certainly must have been a reader, because no one can just write a book. I mean, when we're little and someone says once upon a time, and we know what's going to happen. There's a person with a problem that needs to be solved, and there's a journey, and there's obstacles, and there's a happy ending. That's the flow. That's a story. We know that construction. Did you read a lot as a child after playing with your dolls? Did your dolls tell the stories from books? How did that all work?
Yeah, I have always been a reader, almost to the point of if you looked around my house, you would see nothing but books and say that maybe I need to stop buying them. But good
No.
luck with that. Yeah, good luck with that. I mean, I can't get enough, and so it's always been true. I as I said earlier, I read widely. I don't have one genre that I enjoy. I really like to read everything. And that's been good for my writing because what that allows me to do is to see that the story wants to tell itself and the genre is a secondary consideration. And I'm really fine with that. The genre, the story will have its own energy. It'll have its own narrative drive. And I'm there to find out what that is sometimes. But I don't set out, today I'm going to write book club fiction and tomorrow I'm going to write, I don't do it that way.
I just love the story wants to tell itself. That's quite an astonishing and brings tears to my eyes a little bit to think of that. But to, rewinding a little bit to when you were a child or when you were a teenager or in college, were there books that were formative to you that changed your life or made you think about the world in a different way? Do you remember what they might be?
Yeah, I've always been a fan of things that are um, mysterious in a way. I remember Hallie Efron once said that everything is either a mystery or a romance.
Yeah, or both. Yes, or both. Say The Great Gatsby, all of those.
Exactly. Exactly. So I've always been drawn to that. And I remember when I was in high school, I absolutely fell madly in love with Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier.
Oh, sure.
And I thought, well, there it has it all, right? It's atmospheric, it's romantic, it's tragic, it's mysterious. And so I've always been, interested in books along those lines. I also love books about families. So I just recently, been enamored with Tayari Jones' American Marriage. And I love everything by Louise Erdrich and, just on and on, Tana French and Anna Quinlan, stories that, like you said earlier, something matters. There's something at
Mhm.
stake for the characters, right? We care about them. Even if they're divinely flawed, we care about them.
You wrote a wonderful article about divinely flawed characters. I mean, I heard because there's this thing that people are sort of talking about now is that a character has to be likable, which drives me absolutely crazy.
Mhm.
Um, Even the very hungry caterpillar, he's just ambitious and voracious. What do you think about that likable thing?
Well, I think, Claire Massoud a couple of years ago kind of got offended when an interviewer said, I wouldn't be friends with your characters. And she said, well, I don't think you should be looking for your friends inside a book.
That's great. That's
Which
great.
I really applauded because, we're not looking for friends. We're trying to examine the human experience or the social experience. And I think that I don't, if you don't, if people read my book and think these people aren't likable, but I know them,
Which is
or,
what your reviewer said.
right, or I don't like what they did, but I get it, I understand it. I wouldn't do that, but I see why she did.
Of course,
That,
and that's more interesting, isn't it?
that's
That's
more
oh,
interesting.
completely agree. I heard one author whose name I won't mention was asked the same question, and she said, "I don't think liking them is the point," and then she just sort of went on, which shows you. I mean, there was another review that talked about how this book, Dangers of an Ordinary Night. I mean, you were talking about how you didn't set out to write a book club book, whatever that is. But this is a perfect book club book. This
I
is a
know.
sensational book club book. This turned out to be a book club book. And why is that? What are the things? I mean, what are the things that you want, that you hope book clubs would examine in this novel?
Right. Well, it's so funny because you're right. I did not set out to write a book club book, and yet my publisher so much believes that it is that they actually put the book club guide in the back of the hardcover. So I was honored that they felt that it is a book for people to discuss. And so much so, for anyone who's not familiar with the publishing world, it's not common to put the guide in a hardcover. It's usually in the paperback version. So
And it looks like this book
and it
club
looks like that.
guide.
And it's wonderful. So here's what I think book clubs, are aimed at. They're usually women, but not always. They're coming together for a sense of community and friendship. they're looking for a place to be able to let their hair down, to be able to talk, to be able to exchange. And the books that they choose
Mm.
allow them a vehicle to examine their issues, the issues that they care about. And I think that if anyone called my work book club fiction, I am completely honored, because I would love for a group of people to feel that there is something to explore and that my book could help them do it. I mean, that's just a huge honor.
Of course, I book club book, bring it on. We will, we want that. We want that. Do you remember someone asked you to describe your novel in 5 words? Do you remember what you said?
Oh my goodness, do I
I
remember?
have it right here. If you go,
Okay, you'll see if I get it right.
okay,
Definitely theater is in there. Addiction is in there. Maybe marriage or relationships,
family.
family. Um,
2 words that begin with B, blind spots and betrayal.
there you go.
Exactly. And so there, exactly, there you go. So, and those 5 things are also such brilliant topics, all the roiling emotions that go under all of those words, and all of the architecture that goes on, what theater really means. What is theater? It's not just
Right,
plays.
right,
It's the performance and the roles and the stage managing, and getting something wrong and being perfect and being in the spotlight, which
right.
brings us back to the beginning of the book. We have some questions. Let me just see if I,
Great.
that are coming in. Claudette Newhall. Well, let me go to Crystal King first because it's in a better order here. The
Sure.
fabulous Crystal King, welcome, 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 and so
Hi,
marvelous to
Crystal.
see you. Says, how did you manage? This is a great question. How did you manage to organize all this information between the plot and the play? Yeah, that is a wonderful question. Do you have big notebooks and charts?
I do. I have notebooks. I have charts. I use a writing app called Scrivener. I keep track in lots of different multitude of ways. It's really kind of funny though, because earlier, Hank, you said the thing of, why did you make this so incredibly, challenging and ambitious and whatever. And to be honest with you, that's kind of where I find the fun of it. I'm a big structure person. So I have notebooks and like 10 calendars, and I have journals for every novel, a whole stack of them. And so I actually find part of the fun of the process finding that structure.
Uh,
I kept a list of all the plays I read. I kept a list of the plays that I thought might find their way in. There are many more plays that did not find their way in because they didn't kind of ping my senses as to find their rightful place. So yes, it's a lot of crazy, crazy organizing.
And think about how your blink brain can read a play and say, nope, yep,
Yeah,
nope, yep. Even if you didn't know what the story was, you know that it doesn't fit into the tapestry of what you're planning to write. So I was interviewing Anthony Horowitz, and he has these gorgeous little notebooks where he just writes down every single thing, that every little element of the book, and he doesn't know where they're going to go. He just has an idea and puts it in this idea notebook in this gorgeous penmanship with fountain pen. Um, did you know what your story was when you started? The whole thing?
I I definitely knew the beginning. So I definitely knew that the girls would be abducted and one would return and the other one wouldn't. I did know that. And I also knew the ending. But what I did not know about the ending, and this is kind of funny because you're going to think it's everything. I didn't know how many characters would be there, and I didn't know where it was going to take place, and I didn't know who was going to say what, but I absolutely knew what the actual ending was. So I won't give it away, but I knew the sequence of events that led to the ending, let's say that. But the actual ending scene, I didn't know that at first.
I'm going to go right back and read that again through that filter. That is absolutely, I mean, people who don't write, um, will think that that's weird, but Sue Grafton calls it the magic. That is just the magic of our imaginations. That's right out of, Sunday in the Park with George, isn't it? That how we as human beings, look, I made a hat where there never was a hat. We as human beings are the only creatures who can do that. We can make a new world where it didn't exist before. Do you
Yes,
think
and
about
I think the other reason why I often know my endings is it kind of goes back to that who I really am as a person. that sunny person who believes in hope and believes in connection and really, really believes that relationships can be healthy, is that I always know where my novels are going to end because I want to end on hope. So I feel like I always know that not the tie it up in a bow kind of ending, not the nothing really substantive happened ending, because very difficult things happen in my novels and in this one in particular, but still ending on hope, still ending on the belief that in connection we do better.
And that is another reason why it is just perfect for a book club book. We have two more questions. Virginia Pye, welcome, is saying, you may have mentioned already, but can you share how long it took you to write this? And was it longer than the previous novels? She says, it sounds complicated in a wonderful way.
Oh, wow. Thank you. And it's good to see you, Ginny. Glad you're here. This novel took me, I think, between 3 and 4 years, because I also still have my private practice and I still do consult with schools on preventive mental health. So I still have, the day job. So 3 to 4 years roughly is what how long it takes me. But I love complicated structure. So I have another novel coming out next year that has another ambitious structure. And that one, you're going to think I'm absolutely out of my mind, but it's called Dark Rivers to Cross. And the story mimics a river. So it's the flow of a river, but with the obstacles along the way. And so I really tried to build a narrative structure that was compelling enough to drive you forward, the flow of a river, but with a number of obstacles along the way. So
with the shallows and the narrows and the
eddies and the haystacks and the rapids, and so I'm nuts.
Yes, I was not going to say that. I was going to say I love your brain, but if you want to call it nuts, but gorgeously nuts. And that was Claudette Newhall's question. Are you planning to write more novels? The perfect closing question for us this evening, because when I freeze like that, I'm looking at the questions and the little gizmo comes up and then it goes away, and I think it interferes with the transmission. So forgive me for that. That's technology getting in the way. But that is the perfect question. Thank you for closing this evening. I want to, before Becca comes back on from Belmont Books, I want to just show you this book again. Urge you to read it. It is quite extraordinary. As I said before, it is fascinating, unique, it's meaningful, it matters. It really is a life-changing, not only riveting and immersive, but a life-changing novel for all readers. And Lynn, I hope it changes your life as well.
Thank you, Hank. Your generosity is astounding, and I am so grateful to have this conversation with you. It's just, you put your work out in the world and you hope that it has an impact, and that's all I can hope for. So thank you for hosting tonight and letting me take a stab at that, right? It really matters a great deal. Thank you very much.
Well, you're getting all kinds of congratulations Ginny Pye is saying that's not very long for a novel, in my opinion. And Allison is saying that was wonderful. Thank you. And Crystal is putting in all caps, congrats, Lynn. And that is wonderful. So I will call Becca back on the screen tonight to say thank you and good night from Belmont Books, and make sure you put up, and here's the link in the chat.
Don't forget Hank's latest, which will also keep you on the edge of your seat and is also about fame in the spotlight and what that does to relationships.
Exactly.
No doubt.
Thank you. You're very generous. Thank you so much.
You can find both of those books at the link I put in the chat. And please make sure to support both these authors and Belmont Books. And we just felt so honored to host this event and just want to say congratulations again to Lynn. And with that, thank you so much. This was wonderful. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.